So, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the plenary event on big opportunities in the new age, small satellites. My name is Kai Schrogel. I am Vice President of the International Institute of Space Law, and I will be the moderator for the next 1 hour. Now, small satellites, big opportunities. Indeed, small satellites are no longer the only option for small countries or small companies. Small satellites are a trend, and not only a simple trend, we could call it a real mega trend. Small satellites pose challenges in the most various fields. In engineering, in science, in application. They pose challenges for business, but even more so opportunities. And they pose challenges for regulation as well as policies. I hope we were able to put an interesting panel together which tries to encompass a look at all these challenges I have just outlined. We will start with an overview on the sector by Alex da Silva from SSTL, but he is here in his capacity as the coordinator of the SmallSat Symposium here at the Congress, a symposium which has a huge success, 8 sessions, I think more than 70 papers, so this is a field which is of the utmost importance and interest to the participants as well as to the speakers here at the Congress. We then turn to our hosts. We have 2 presentations from MBT Space. Ofer Doron and Ofi Asriel will be presenting the latest developments in Israel and in particular for their company. And we will then have 2 more presentations which I categorize under the term New Age, New Space. And this is Barry Matzo and Mike Safyan from Virgin Galactic and from Planet Labs, respectively. And they will show that new age and new space can do without slides. This is already some achievement, and we might hear some more things from them, even announcements. So we will be interested to see what is happening there. Now, the last part of our panel, of our discussions, will deal with the challenges in the field of regulation and policies. And when I say challenges, you will see that lawyers are not only there for making things complicated, but lawyers are also there for facilitating activities. And we will have Stephen Freeland from the Western University of Sydney, Australia, and we have Jana Robinson from the Prague Security Studies Institute who will talk about the issue of space traffic management, which is also becoming more and more important in view, in particular, of a growing population of small satellites. Now let's start off with Alex. You have the floor in introducing us to the broader panorama on small satellites.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming this early. I will talk a little bit about set the scene here on small satellites. First of all, if you have questions for the panelists a little bit later, there are sheets that you can write your questions on in case you don't want to ask them direct. So find them down the side of the hall here. So my name is Alex da Silva. I am the coordinator for the small satellite session here in the IAC, and my colleague, together with my colleague Rhoda Hornstein, who is here as well. So I'll set the scene. First of all, just for those of you who are not aware, small satellites, well, very basic definition that allows anyone to be able to spot whether a satellite is a small satellite or not is up here on the screen. Anything generally under 500 kilos is considered a small satellite. And then they are subdivided into micro, mini, nanosatellites and smaller. And you can see some pictures here with satellites with people next to them just to get some idea of the scale of those. And as you can see, there's even some that are smaller than a credit card size that have been launched now and that are being used in some applications. So what is the excitement about this? Well, The rationale for small satellites really came about because of the frustration with a lot of people of space missions that took a long time to build, that were very expensive, and because they were so expensive and took so long to build, you had to spend more money to make them more reliable. And so small satellites were sort of a reaction to that. You could build small satellites to do things quickly, to try things out, and to not have to do that on such a high budget. And that makes it possible for researchers to then access space. So that was really the driver for this. And small satellites really provide complementary capabilities to larger satellites. They're used for different things generally. And I'll talk a little bit about that. The best analogy I find is this one. So if you need to do a certain job, you need to get people from A to B. A bus is the most cost-effective way to do that per passenger. But if you just have a few people in your family, you actually have a car to do that. And that is the same with small satellites. There are some jobs where just actually you go for a much smaller form factor, it's cheaper, and you get to do exactly what you want to do, and you don't have to sit next to that person that you don't want to sit next to on the bus. The other element in small satellites that's becoming quite interesting is to use them in constellations. So there are certain things that you cannot do with one satellite. And that is really related to covering the Earth in high temporal resolution, whether that is for communications or for Earth observation or for other applications. And if with groups of small satellites make it possible to do this in a cost-effective manner. So this again is a trend towards the use of constellations now that small satellites have become almost mainstream. So in the Small Satellite Symposium here in the IAC, we just an overview. We discuss topics in a wide range of areas related to small satellites. You can see up here on the screen. We cover pretty much every topic related to small satellites. And we coordinate these with other symposia that are running, like the Earth Observation Symposium, the Launcher Symposium. We focus on the small satellite element. Overall, we get around 250 abstracts per year for these 8 sessions. We generally select around 100 papers of those. And then if they all turn up, there is space for those. If they don't turn up, they have a little bit more room. So this year we accepted 103 abstracts, and I think 75 of those have shown up. And we treat all papers equally as well in the symposium, so we don't care whether it's a student paper or whether it comes from industry or government. All of the papers are mixed together. So it's a good overview, and we select them on their merit. So next on to a few trends. What most of you know and have seen is that there's clearly a trend of an increasing number of small satellites being launched. This shows all satellites being launched, so this in purple there is anything above 500 kilos. And what you see is that now small satellites are starting to make up about half of the number of satellites launched in recent years. And there's a clear trend over the last 10 to 15 years of small satellites being more and more used. And this shows the same in proportion. If you actually look at that in a little bit more detail, what you can see is what was brought about was that it became possible in the early 1980s to use microprocessors and memories. And these made it possible to use a small satellite outside the reach of your own ground station. And that made it actually quite affordable to have a small satellite do things that were actually becoming useful. And that was sort of the dawn of sort of modern small small satellites. That very quickly, that technology was then picked up in the communications industry, which is quite advanced for satellite communications. And there's a big peak in around 2000 of small satellites launched for Globalstar, Iridium, Orbcomm, and various others. But more recently, there's been a trend towards miniaturization, really driven by the miniaturization of technology, and that has made it possible to build satellites of just a few kilos. And as you see on the graph here, that has led to sort of an age of commercialization. So small satellites have come of age. They're now capable tools. They're being used in commercial ventures, and I've put a few up there on the screen, and they are also represented on the panel here. On the companies that are using small satellites as commercial business, in their commercial business, for various purposes. And really, the reason for that is because small satellites are the only way in constellation to access the whole globe in a high temporal resolution. So what are the trends? Well, the new business trends are really that in terms of small satellites being used for commercial ventures. So we see the sort of emergence of new space, of companies that are starting to use space in a commercial manner and starting to take that away in a way from what governments were doing, sort of adding onto what governments are doing with space. There are also now many initiatives using constellations, CubeSats, and microsatellites for various purposes. And what is also interesting, there are many non-traditional space business models that are being brought into space. So it's quite a healthy thing that is growing the space industry, bringing new ideas in and moving things along quite fast. So really concluding with that is that small satellites now have come of age. The technology is readily available. In our symposium here, we discuss a lot of the technologies, mission applications, and ideas. But satellites are now no longer the issue. And they can address a very wide range of needs across a range of applications. So I'll leave it with that and I'll continue on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. We now turn to two presentations from our hosts, showing the achievements and activities, current activities and future activities, I also hope, from MBT, and Offa is the first to talk.
So, space in Israel has always been about small satellites, quite a bit before it became a trend. And, how do I page down here? And it started out because we do things the wrong way. We launch westwards and the launcher is small, and there's a size limit in diameter and in weight, and if it doesn't fit, it doesn't launch. And there's nothing that gets the engineers as ingenious as a brick wall. And the users want the performance, and you make it fit. And you make it better and better and better as you are going along. So we are constantly working at improving whilst barely growing in size. In fact, we're fluctuating around it. So we've gone to resolutions that are about 40 centimeters in a satellite that weighs 380 kilograms. That's 20% of the huge satellites are giving similar resolutions up from space nowadays. And that is not an engineering issue, it's a philosophy issue. And small satellites are philosophy. You have to think small. You have to do everything small all the time. You have to do it without giving up on redundancy. And at least in the types of satellites we're doing. Others are going smaller and doing things differently, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But in the medium-sized small satellites, you don't want to give up redundancy. You don't want to give up performance. You don't want to give up all the bells and whistles, and you still want to make it small. And the only way is to keep it small from the very beginning. I've heard people say, I've got a 500-kilogram bus. I'll make some modifications and make it a 200-kilogram bus. Doesn't work. It's like trying to lose 30 kilograms, not from the satellite, but from where it grows usually around our stomach. It doesn't work. You've got to start from the beginning to keep it very, very small, and it's a design philosophy all across the board. And to do that, you need control or access to all the equipment that either you've designed for yourself, or you have subcontractors designed for you, or you have like-minded people designing for themselves or for others, but with small and high performance in mind all across. You can't just go to the store and buy something unless someone's made it small and good on purpose. And now that wasn't small enough for us, so we're dealing in nanosats, and we quickly find out that much of the commercial stuff you buy isn't really good enough, and we're doing our own work on our own nanosatellites. Because there might be some of a business case for it for us. I know there are others that are doing great business with it, but on our company structure, probably some. But more importantly, because it's invigorating our internal discussion on getting things even smaller. And some of my more senior people hate these nanosats. I talk to them about nanosats and they want to kill me. But we're going there because of the arguments it creates inside our own engineering community about where you can give things up and where you can make the trade-offs and make things even smaller. And we're going to be going up in performance and down in weight over our next satellites. That's a very clear goal for us. But it's not go down in both of them. It's go up in performance as you're going down in weight. And I think that's a basic goal that we've got. and we're going to take it hopefully all the way up to the moon with a very, very small lunar lander that'll make it up there as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ophir is next.
Okay. IAI MBT has been building the AMOS geostationary communication satellites for many years, successfully, mainly for the domestic market. When we look forward to how we proceed with the Geo product line, what we decided to do was to develop a small all-electric Geo satellite. The reason we went to the smaller size and not to the larger size AMOS satellites which we are building today is for several reasons. One, it allows us to leverage the experience in the miniaturized LEO satellites and to take the miniaturized components, and this allows us to make geostationary smaller. Second of all, we are looking at the market, and in order not to be in direct competition with more established manufacturers, we are looking for a market niche that allows us to build satellites that will be specific for customers who are not looking for larger satellites. Therefore, we have found a sizing of a spacecraft which will be both interesting to customers that do not want a larger spacecraft and also cost-effective for us to build. The goal of this program is to make a spacecraft at the 20 to 30 transponder range, which is much smaller, almost half, than a large communication satellite. But the cost per transponder for this program, meaning the cost to the customer when he reaches space, will be comparable to a larger satellite. This, we think, will be very attractive to customers who are looking for this kind of smaller satellites. And this will enable programs that do not require a 50 or 60 transponder satellite, but have a smaller requirement, and with the same per transponder cost, we'll be able to put the program into space. So when we are looking at this opportunity, what we are seeing is, first and foremost, what we see programs which what we call national satellites, meaning aspiration for national ownership of a satellite or spectrum rights. Many times these do not require such large satellites, as we said, 50 or 60 transponders. We have seen programs that the requirements are much lower. And if we propose a spacecraft which is designed exactly for this size, it will be the most cost efficient and will enable these programs which for a larger satellite will be prohibited. Also, we see a requirement for efficient use of spectrum, what we call spectrum gap fillers, where there are non-used spectrum slices. Sometimes you require a smaller satellite to fill in that spectrum gap. And of course, government programs which usually do not require so much power and transponders, but are more focused on smaller payloads. Also, the trend which we see in communication satellites, both for digital processing on board and for advanced antenna designs, both these trends de-emphasize the requirement for much more power and much more transponders, and bring the emphasis for a lower power payload, but which has a lot of processing and efficient or advanced beams and beam designs. So these trends all combine to create a segment of the market which will require a smaller platform for geostationary satellite, although it will maybe not be the main market which will remain for larger satellites, but will definitely be a part of the market which we intend to enter. The second reason for developing a small platform is our in-house capabilities. So with the same infrastructure that IA has built for the LEO satellites, which are relatively small, we intend to use this infrastructure for the AMOS-E satellites. The mass range is supposed to be between 1.5 ton to 2 ton, which is what we see is as a sweet spot, both for using in-house capabilities, both for units that we have developed and are for the LEO, and we are now upgrading for GEO satellites. And most importantly, we see it as an opportunity for low-cost launch. All these combined will enable us to provide, as we said, a transponder per cost in space comparable to much larger satellites. So we said a low-cost launch, a low-cost platform by in-house work and existing infrastructure, and payload as designed for the customer will enable us to provide a program at a much affordable cost than today. I will just say one word about the launch. So as we said, 1.5 to 2 ton class satellite will enable us several opportunities for a reduced cost launch. For example, aggregated launches where both satellites are co-leads. So this is exactly perfect for a 2-ton satellite. Also, launchers such as PSLV, which have reduced capacity to GTO but are much lower cost, are also an opportunity for such a small satellite. And as you know, there is talk about reusable launchers, which will provide a much reduced capacity to GTO, but at the sub 2-ton class, you can still go on such a launcher and receive a much, much lower cost launch. All this, as we say, is the focus of providing per cost transponder comparable to large satellite. I will show 2 images of a deployed spacecraft and a stowed spacecraft. As we said, we are doing a lot of work in-house in order to provide the lower cost of this platform. I will just give an example. A smaller GEO satellite can fit into a 747 Boeing, which gives us a much cheaper transportation. And you think it would be a small thing, but actually this results in great saving for the program, which enables us to provide a lower cost program. Just to finalize, the program has started development 2014. We are looking to launch the first class of satellite in the end of 2018, and follow-on satellites will be able to be provided in 30 months from contract. So this is our focus now on the GEO product line. We have seen interest from several customers, and we are very optimistic about this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ofer and Ophir, for providing us some information on, first of all, the philosophy of IAA's activities, and then showing this exciting project you are currently undertaking, which is certainly path-breaking in a number of respects. Thank you very much. I should say that if you have questions to be addressed to the panelists, you can ask our assistants here, left and right, who have a form. You can fill it in, return it, and then it will be brought up to the podium. Now let's turn to New Age, New Space, and the first to speak on our list is Barry Matzo from Virgin Galactic. Barry.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So I don't have any slides, and frankly, I just want to make a few points that I think are better instead of talking about what we're doing at Virgin Galactic. But a couple of points. One is, earlier was talked about the small satellite market, and it can't be overemphasized how important innovation is a key part. Innovation and the ability to do a fast update with the latest technology. You cannot do that with a 15, 20-year satellite. You can do that if you have a short-term satellite and it's small so the capital costs are minimized. All those things feed into being able to create this kind of new vibrant industry around small satellites. At Virgin Galactic, what are we? We're simply going to provide that space access for that business to grow. If space access isn't made, I mean, the fundamentals of launch haven't changed in this space. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be launched on time. It's nice if it's responsive. If it can be launched in a very short period of time, that's great, and I hope that we can do that. And the third thing is it needs to be a great value. It needs to be offered at a good price. If you put those three things together, do it over and over again, the small satellite market will thrive because it has all the elements of what made technology grow, what made technology drive new industries. So we consider ourselves just a critical part of making that industry grow and happen. What is Virgin Galactic? Everyone knows us for White Knight 2, Spaceship 2, and our space tourism business, doing suborbital launches. But we've also got Launcher One, and that's what's addressing this small sat market. And what is Launcher One? Launcher One is just a rocket with a heritage design. The entire, because it's servicing a rather small payload, relatively speaking, a smaller payload, that all of the design can be conservative and low cost. And then the other part, the other element is we're going to use a commercial aircraft to take Launcher One and insert it into orbit. So with all those elements, we hope we can put together a good value, a reliable value, a responsive value to help this industry grow. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Barry. Now, Mike.
And so from the satellite side, I'll talk about Planet Labs and what we've been up to. So we're a private company based in San Francisco, California. We started work around 2010. And since then, I think we've been riding this wave of innovation and growth in the small satellite market and technologies to the point where we have about 35 satellites operating in orbit right now. Our Dove satellites, they're 3U CubeSats, 5 kilograms. We've launched over 100. And in this handful of years, we've gone through 13 iterations of our satellites. So we're constantly improving the technology of our satellites in this business model where we want to be launching the latest and greatest and designing for short lifetimes so that when we're developing things on the ground, we can very quickly see them operating in space in a way that's different from the traditional approach of designing for a 10, 15-year lifetime. Some other things in terms of like the philosophy that was discussed earlier in the panel, you know, for us, because we're launching in such large numbers, a certain element of failure is okay. So over 11 launch campaigns, we've seen 2 launches failed, and so we've lost 26 satellites on Antares failure, and also some satellites on a Falcon 9. And we're still able to take that into stride. There's also been some things that we've seen on orbit that we've been able to very quickly respond to with this fast iteration process. So again, it's a very different philosophy and mindset, but the product that's coming out of it, I think, really speaks for itself. So the quality of imagery that we're getting from the satellites, you know, when we get to our full constellation of 150 satellites, we'll be able to cover the entire Earth every day with a resolution of about 3 to 5 meter GSD, which is pretty spectacular for a 5 kilogram satellite. And some of the other differences we're operating towards, it's more of a monitoring capability. So we're constantly taking pictures. We're not tasking any specific region because we're getting all of the regions. So in terms of customers that we can serve, it ranges from a whole array of agriculture, mapping, disaster response, environmental applications, a lot of really exciting stuff. And really, from a very commercial perspective, I think that it's important to highlight that the funding has been primarily from venture capital. We've raised over $180 million, which I think, again, is pretty amazing for a small startup based in San Francisco. You know, we started in a garage with about 8 people, and now we're somewhere around 150 in our San Francisco office. Another really big piece to how we've been maturing and how we're showing up in the market is we acquired Blackbridge Rapid Eye recently, which has been again a fairly unique thing in the space industry for a small company like that to join forces with an already established partner. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of really exciting things of how we merge the Rapid Eye satellites with the capability of the Dove satellites, both for what's available in the Rapid Eye archive with our archive, what we're producing today and how we go forward with that in terms of taking the best technologies from both sides, which really do have a fairly similar mindset and philosophy, and also similar resolution and imagery capability. So I think it's a pretty exciting time for new space. We're seeing a lot of the commercial applications start to form in such a way that, you know, we're not necessarily going for the highest resolution, but the revisit rate, that updating the entire Earth every day is enabling so many different applications that you couldn't do otherwise. And so again, just as in context for a small company in San Francisco to have launched that many satellites, to have built out a ground network, we're building out the data analysis and distribution, and really the product that we're selling is the imagery and the data that can be derived from that. And so I think that this is a trend that we'll see in other areas as well. As Barry was mentioning, the launch can be a challenge sometimes. We've seen launch failures. We've also seen launch delays. We think that the nano launcher industry is a huge help that's coming along, and we're very supportive of that. And actually, to do kind of like a soft announcement that Planet Labs and Virgin Galactic have signed a deal to launch 2 Doves on their test launches in 2016 and 2017. You know, as much as part of our technology development, you know, we continue to launch constellations of satellites for operational modes, but we also launch technology demonstrators so that we're making sure that we're continuously pushing the edge of technology and flying the latest things that we'd like to try out in space to fold into our operations. So Virgin Galactic has provided us with an excellent opportunity to do that in 2016 and 2017. So we're very excited and happy for that going forward, and to keep launching the satellites, to keep flying the latest and greatest, and then providing the best imagery and products that we can to our customers for a whole number of applications that I think a lot of people are excited for.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry and Mike, for presenting your views and your insights on new age in satellite, small satellite activities from 2 different perspectives. And thank you also for choosing this roundtable for this announcement. Thank you very much. So, this brings me again to the reminder, if you have further questions, ask the assistants for the sheets, and we will then take up questions because we are well in time. We turn now to the regulatory and policy part, and first to speak is Stephen Freeland from the Western Sydney University, and representing also the International Institute of Space Law, ISL.
Thank you, Caio, and good morning, everybody, and good morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. You know what it's like. In every crowd where it's exciting and the technology is great, there's always got to be the lawyer. And the lawyer, when my colleagues heard there was a lawyer on the panel, the lawyer jokes started coming out already. My brief task here is to not introduce the law as a limiting factor, but to introduce the law in terms of how it may be relevant to this incredibly exciting technology, to then pose questions to those who have not already addressed the challenge, including, for example, my own government, as to how to somehow incorporate into the regulatory framework enabling procedures that will allow this sort of technology to continue and to provide all those incredibly exciting opportunities that we are already hearing about and no doubt will come in the future. Forgive me, those of you in the audience who are well aware that there is quite an established legal framework for outer space activities. What I propose to do very briefly is just outline the international framework, with the point that the international framework was by and large put together in a far earlier era, when this type of technology and the other sorts of technologies that are being utilized now almost as mainstream activities in outer space. Those activities were at that time beyond the contemplation of those that were putting together the regulatory framework. So we have a series of United Nations treaties that were put together in the 60s and 70s, dealing with the activities at the time, and really without any foresight in terms of small technology, and indeed without relatively little idea about how space would become such a commercial paradigm as well. So we have an outer space treaty. That outer space treaty puts obligations on states to take responsibility for all national activities that take place in outer space, and small satellites clearly are national activities in space. It also obligates states to authorize those activities by way of licensing or whatever, and to continually supervise those activities. They should do that also because there's an international framework for liability. Liability where damage is caused by a space object, either in space or on Earth. And small satellites clearly are space objects. And so this liability goes to the state. It is uncapped, and it is unlimited in terms of time frames. So there are rules to determine which states are potentially liable under this regime. They are called launching states, but by and large, any state that's involved in activities, or its commercial entities are involved in small satellite activities, would fall under this rubric and have a liability. There's a registration treaty that requires states to have a national register and also to provide information to the United Nations about all space objects that are launched into Earth orbit or beyond. And you obviously not only have to provide that, you have to set up the procedures to do that. Governments need to know what sort of activities are going on in their own territories and under their jurisdiction to provide that information. All of you are aware, of course, of the ITU and the need to coordinate through your national administration any requests and needs for frequencies, and that needs to go through quite a rigorous, well, a very rigorous bureaucratic process in Geneva, and then that requires coordination with other stakeholders, etc. There are some guidelines, so-called soft law guidelines, although that's an expression I hate, but soft law guidelines, so not in the form of treaties, that deal with space debris, and on a voluntary basis asking states, and therefore through states their commercial entities, to comply with various standards in the expectation and hope that we will mitigate the degree of increase of space debris. And of course, every country has its own existing national laws that might be relevant to these activities. So the consequence of all of this is that there are rules, but these rules that are in place at the international level really aren't directed towards the specifics of small satellites. They are relevant. The small satellite operators and their states need to comply, but so often I have people coming to myself and they go to governments and they say, this law, these laws that I have to comply with, they don't fit. They don't fit with what we're trying to do. And of course, as in every industry where the technology is racing ahead, and we're hearing today, and no doubt we're hearing through this conference, about how technology is moving forward so fast, and it's so exciting, and innovation is the buzzword. And of course, in all of those sorts of activities, law always struggles not only to keep up, but even to make baby steps forward. And that's certainly the case in this area as well. And it's a situation that we all have to grapple with, because very few countries in their national laws have addressed this. Some have, but if I take my own country's example, we have a very sophisticated national space law, but it was put together in 1998, again, without small satellites in mind. And so entrepreneurs and small satellite operators are coming to us and saying, well, how do we comply with this national law? It's too onerous, it's too rigorous. It's designed for a big satellite world where those behind the big satellites have large balance sheets and have a proven track record of many years, and the technology is well proven. And of course, that doesn't necessarily fit with the paradigm of small satellites. So there are liability issues, remembering that the state is always going to be liable. So the state has to work out how, on the one hand, to enable this innovation and technology, but on the other hand, to find the appropriate balance, and that will vary from state to state, the appropriate balance between enabling innovation and protecting the state. And as I can tell you, my own government is grappling with that issue at the moment. And of course, in the meantime, the entrepreneurs are saying, well, hurry up, we need this enabling law, because if you don't allow it to happen, someone else is going to do this idea somewhere else, and I miss out on my potentially lucrative commercial opportunity. So, insurance, is that the answer? Is it too onerous to ask small entrepreneurial companies, universities even, but smaller companies in relatively embryonic stages of their development to take out insurance to help, if you like, protect the state from the potential liability? There are all sorts of issues about registration, the issues I raised before. I want to move just to the last slide, and then I'll stop. That gives rise to the need for policy, and I know Jana's going to talk about policy in one particular area, but states and governments and regulators are now grappling with this idea, because the international framework, as much as we would like it, is not going to change anytime soon in a fairly sophisticated way. And so to allow this technology to develop from a regulatory viewpoint, the onus will be on governments, on states. And of course, every state has a different set of circumstances with which it has to deal. And so state law will vary from state to state, which of course has the effect that we don't have homogeneous standards, at least not in the short term. And that will be, as I said, a balancing. Every government will go through this. Some have already done it and have been very proactive in encouraging technology. Some, like my own and others, are really sitting back and really trying to work it out carefully. But as I said, the clock is ticking for a lot of the innovators and entrepreneurs. So in the end, policy decisions need to be made by regulators. And I encourage all the regulators and all of the policy makers to look at this very favorably in terms of enabling this innovation. Of course, they have to be cognizant of these risks, but that will always need to be balanced with the idea of encouraging innovation, encouraging what makes sense from a commercial opportunity. But it's not appropriate, even though entrepreneurs ask for it, for governments perhaps to allow for complete exemptions from the regulatory requirements for those in a startup situation, even though the companies would say that would suit them very much. Because I think as we move down this track, and without wishing to sound too sober, we always need to encourage best practice and responsible behavior. And we know, as we've heard, that in small satellites there still is a higher tolerance towards failure in these stages. And of course, that's perfectly understandable and acceptable in this stage of the development of the technology. But we still will always, in the regulatory framework, need to have this balance, but encourage best practice, responsible behavior. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now, Jana.
Good morning, everybody. As the last speaker, I think you have heard a lot about small satellites, so I will keep my presentation brief. But I will mention some of the implications of the fact that space has evolved from exclusively governmental domain to that embraced also the private sector. As we know, space today, we have some 1,200 satellites operated by over 60 governmental, commercial and academic entities. We have as a number of implications of this fact. So we have growing number of space debris, increasing demand for limited radio frequency spectrum, and orbital slots, and these are among the concerns and the challenges related to management of all activities. As we heard from the previous speakers, the small satellite offer a range of exciting opportunities, but the fact that the number of small satellites for operations, not only for scientific experiments, has grown significantly have implications. So some numbers, for example, in years 2013 and 2014, we had the launch of some 70 satellites annually, and there are plans, of course, for launch of mega constellations of some 80 to 120 satellites in polar orbits. We have, for example, plans for OneWeb and other of these new enterprises. So if this trend continues, which is, I think, likely, there will be a need to address this new traffic in space together with the overall increase in space activities. So a comprehensive space traffic management will probably be needed to ensure the safety and sustainability of space activities. Among the concerns are how to manage different altitude regimes, the space debris mitigation, usage of radio frequencies, and long-term evolution of the space object environment. To address these and other issues, a work is currently ongoing in the framework of the International Academy of Astronautics on space traffic management. The space traffic management concept seeks to provide a framework for the safety and security of space activities in the long term. The concept was first comprehensively addressed in the first study of the IAA in 2006, and the discussions on this topic have evolved significantly. One example is a very recent development in the legal subcommittee of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, where space traffic management was selected as one of the two new topics together with small satellites for discussion in 2016. The space traffic management, in other words, means the set of technical and regulatory provisions promoting safe access into operations in and return from space to Earth free from physical and radio frequency interference. The study to be completed in 2016 does not only provide an update on the developments in the past 10 years, but also seeks to offer a roadmap for implementation of an STM regime. So to conclude, this study is based on the rationale that we need new perspectives how to manage the increasingly complex space activities. And this can be only done if we merge the long-term advanced thinking on the policy and regulatory side together with the rigorous scientific data that we have from our colleagues in the technical field. So with this, I'll conclude my short presentation.
Thank you very much, Jana. This also concludes the list of our speakers. We had an overview, we had a view and an insight in the hosts' activities, we had New Age space, and we had a set of ideas on the regulatory and policy environment. Now I received a few questions, and one of those questions relates to what has been said in the last part of our panel. And it is about space debris. It is addressed to Planet Labs, and the question is, how do you avoid your satellites becoming debris?
So from the very beginning, debris has been a critical issue for us. A number of our employees have spent previous parts of their career studying the debris issue, so it's something that we understand and have been at the forefront of our thought. In terms of what we talked about of policies need and regulations, on the other hand, we also need companies leading the way as an example how to be responsible actors in space, and we feel like Planet Labs is doing that. Some of the things that we're doing are launching to appropriate orbits. So these small satellites have operational lifetimes on the order of a handful of years. So we want to make sure that the orbital altitudes that we're launching to match that, such that we're deorbiting in a handful of years as well, and not sticking up around at the higher orbits where there's more dense regions of debris and higher risks of collision. So we're avoiding the dense regions by going below, which is also better for us operationally in terms of resolution, so it's a win-win there. We also have capabilities with our satellite to perform differential drag maneuvers. So even if a satellite doesn't have on-orbit propulsion, there may be ways to minimize surface areas for collision, or even to perform maneuvers to get out of the way for a potential collision. And I think another really big part of that is going to be launch opportunities like Virgin Galactic to very specific orbits. The first handful of years of small satellites has been primarily piggybacks for bigger missions going to the higher orbits that are more appropriate for those. So as we see launchers like Launcher 1 come online, we'll see a more appropriate utilization of orbits for small satellites, so that the impact on debris is pretty much minimal.
Thank you. May I pass that question also to Alex? In your symposium, I guess you will also discuss the issues of debris mitigation and prevention. Are there any new ideas, new concepts which are upcoming?
There's certainly a lot of research in small satellites now on how to support the debris mitigation measures that are out there in terms of passivating spacecraft at the end of life, deorbiting satellites at the end of life. So there's a lot of work going on in trying to use active measures like tethers or deployables at the end of life, and some of those have been tested in recent years on small satellites, and there's a number of tests underway. The European Union and ESA have some small satellite missions that are going up to look at active debris removal and also removal of satellites from orbit. And again, those are starting out as small satellite technologies, because we can have many different ways of trying out different techniques and finding the ones that are the good ones to use. So yeah, there's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of study going on in this particular area.
Thank you. I have now two questions which are dealing with the broader issue of remote sensing. The first question is, can smallsat technology or technologies reliably replace important legacy systems like Landsat without sacrificing data continuity? This is one question. And another question, which also relates to Earth observation, but more in the regulatory field, is several of the companies on stage want to provide data for government customers. Can you talk about balancing open data access policies and your business model? So, who would like to take on one or both of these questions? Alex.
I will start, and I'm sure Mike will want to have some comments on here on this as well. So I'm talking now as part of the company I work for, Surrey Satellite Technology. This is exactly what we've been doing. So the simple answer to the first question about can small satellites provide this continuity, the answer is yes. It is possible with small satellites to have similar quality data in quite a constrained way, and in such a way where you can do sort of 80% of what Landsat does, but in a much smaller and cheaper package. And in fact, it is possible to actually improve on the capability as well. So one mission that we were involved with was the International Disaster Monitoring Mission, Disaster Monitoring Constellation. And we had satellites that provide a very wide swath data continuity for Landsat, but in a limited set of bands. And that is a capability that has now evolved to the type of missions that Planet Labs is involved with in providing very high temporal resolution, very similar data. So.
Yeah, and I think that there are other scenarios where small satellites can provide complementary capabilities. So for instance, there's some limitations on physics for how to get higher resolution, but higher resolution satellites can also work in concert with the smaller satellites that are doing more of a monitoring mission. And so, yeah, I think as Alex mentioned, it depends on what you focus on. So if we can get 80% of the capability, we won't get, some of the bands that Landsat can, but for most of the applications that we think will have a huge positive impact on people all over the world, we can still do that with small satellites, and it's not a replacement in our mind. It's really a complementary system.
Thank you. I have another question which also deals with the economics of small satellites and the business models. The question is, I see a push towards more small satellite constellations and opportunities for their use. That said, a number of small satellite constellations have gone bankrupt. How has the business model changed to address the failings in the past, and how are you responding to the new challenges? Yeah, I'm sure it's addressed to you.
So I think that in terms of the business model, for us, we've already seen a very strong market response. We have contract bookings that exceed the amount that we've had from investment, and so I think that the market for us is quite solid, and there are other applications which I think we'll see how that goes. In terms of communications constellations, I think that that's a really interesting field to see how small satellites can thrive compared to what's already in existence. But there's a reason why we chose Earth imaging and not communications.
I'll add something. I actually worked on the Global Star program way back when I was at Qualcomm, and so I can speak firsthand. I think framework is required to answer that question. The framework is that those are all telecom programs. That's all they were focused on. And the competitor was, at the time, GSM. And the notion of the growth, everybody knows that's in the business, the growth of GSM was unprecedented. And that overcame anything to do with a satellite-based system. From a cost per user perspective, it was just not competitive. That framework is completely different now, and the costs associated with terrestrial networks have become much higher, capital investments much larger for cellular systems and data systems. So the metric now is cost per bit, because everything is IP. And yes, cost per bit for satellite is going to be higher by definition. The question is it close enough? And if it's competitive enough, then in fact it can compete with terrestrial networks.
Thank you very much. It's 9:30. We are at the end of our session. Thank you very much, all the speakers, and I think we can share a round of applause for all on the panel. Thank you very much.